Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today we are going to talk about 5 of my favorite nonfiction books. Now, I love reading nonfiction, and I do have more than 5 favorites, but I figured in order to keep this video short, I'm just going to do 5 books, and then maybe in another video I will recommend some more. First, we have Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I'm not usually a celebrity memoir person, but I've always loved Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, and I just found this story to be absolutely amazing. It is funny and touching and sad and infuriating, and it was just such a wonderful memoir. Trevor was born in South Africa to a Black mother and a white father, and essentially his birth was a crime. He was born in 1984, where at that time, South Africa was part of the apartheid regime. And so it was actually illegal for mixed race marriages. Illegal. So he was born a crime, Black mother, white father, and this also chronicles his life in apartheid South Africa, growing up as a mixed race child at that time. This book is also a love letter to his mother, because his mother is fearless and strong, and she just seemed like an absolutely amazing woman, and Trevor probably wouldn't have made it to where he is without her. She knew what she was doing when she had a relationship with a white man, knowing that it was illegal, knowing that any child that resulted from it was going to have a slightly difficult life. Trevor spent most of his time with his mother, not his father, so he had issues not knowing where he belonged. He wasn't, white enough, and he wasn't Black enough. So he just didn't know where he fit in. He also grew up in poverty, had an abusive stepfather, and all the while recounting all of these traumatic events from his childhood, he gives this story such levity, and you just can't help rooting for this young kid to whatever he wants to do in life, just rooting for him. You just want him to succeed. And I really enjoyed this. So even if you don't like celebrity biographies or memoirs, if you just want to know, you want a history lesson on firsthand experience of living in apartheid South Africa, you want to read this, because it really was eye-opening. I didn't know very much at all about the conditions in South Africa at this time. Very little. I cannot recommend it enough. Next, I actually want to recommend an author, not necessarily a particular book of that author, and that author would be Alison Weir. She is a historical author of British history, and she's written so many books, and I am pretty sure I own every single one of her books. Alison Weir writes primarily about histories of British royal women and families. She has written a couple of biographies on personages such as Henry VIII. However, she focuses mainly on the women, and that's what I am interested in. She's written books on Eleanor of Aquitaine, Catherine Swynford, Elizabeth of York, Isabella of France, the She-Wolf of France. And I own, I'm pretty sure, every book that she's ever written nonfiction. Alison Weir is also a fiction writer. However, I do not read her fiction because I am always afraid that I will conflate the histories and think that something that happened in the fictional story actually happened in real life. I'm sure Alison Weir is a wonderful fiction writer, but I only purchase and read her nonfiction. There are 2 books in her collection that I haven't read yet. They are sitting on my shelves, and they are soon to be up next. And the first is Queens of Chivalry. This is the 3rd book in a series about medieval queens that she wrote about. The first being Queens of the Conquest, so queens around 1066 and after. And then second book being Queens of the Crusades, and then this book here being Queens of Chivalry. And the second book that is on my shelf that I haven't read yet is a biography on Mary Boleyn. Mary Boleyn was the sister of Anne Boleyn, which was Henry VIII's second wife. Mary Boleyn was actually mistress to Henry VIII before he married Anne Boleyn. And there's not a whole lot of biographies out there about Mary Boleyn. I enjoy Weir's writing because it's accessible and it's still academic. I do trust her sources, but it's readable. I've spent many an hour trying to get through a highly academic book and just tossing it away and just being frustrated because you can't actually understand anything that's going on. She's able to give somewhat of a voice to some of these women that history just really didn't care about, especially these earlier queens, because no one really cared about the women, so not a whole lot was recorded. And in order to get any information about these women, you had to actually read books about their husbands. And so she's actually dedicating pages to the women themselves. Yes, unfortunately, we have to hear a lot about the husbands because that's how history was recorded. It was through the eyes of the men. But I really do enjoy all of her books, and I highly recommend them. Next, we have The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Henrietta Lacks was a poor Black female tobacco farmer who went into the hospital in, I want to say Maryland, I believe Maryland, and I can't recall what surgery she was having, but doctors noticed her cells were very, very special, and they harvested cells from her and since used them in major medical discoveries throughout history. Now, they did this without her consent. She did not know that they were harvesting cells from her, that they were taking bits of her and then using them for medical research. And then that medical research was so successful. So the byline on this book is, doctors took her cells without asking. Those cells never died. They launched a medical revolution in a multi-million-dollar industry. More than 20 years later, her children found out their lives would never be the same. So the cells are called HeLa for Henrietta Lacks. So you've got the HE from her first name and the LA from her last name. So they took these cells, they still use them today. They still use them today, and her family gets nothing out of it. So the cells were taken from her body in 1951, and they helped develop the polio vaccine, cloning, gene mapping. I mean, come on. And her family didn't know about it. She didn't know about it. And her family has nothing. They are not compensated for what they did to this woman. Rebecca Skloot is a journalist. She follows the story. She interviews everybody. And this is really a collision of ethics and race and medicine. And I cannot recommend this enough. So please check it out. Next, we have The Warmth of Other Suns, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration by Isabel Wilkerson. And this tells the story of the Great Migration, which was a movement where Black Americans from the Jim Crow South moved out of Southern United States to the Midwest, the Northeast, and the West from approximately 1915 through 1970. And this exodus from the South of millions of Black Americans throughout the country basically changed the face of the country. Wilkerson focuses on three main stories which are interweaved throughout the historical information. Ida Mae Gladney, who in 1937 left sharecropping in Mississippi for Chicago, where she achieved blue-collar success and was able to vote for Barack Obama when he ran for the Illinois Senate. And then we have George Starling, who fled Florida in 1945 for Harlem, where he fought for civil rights. And then Robert Foster, who left Louisiana in the 1950s to pursue a medical career. Wilkerson does an absolutely beautiful job of taking the historical information of this migration weaving it through these stories, and you get to care about these people so much and learn about a movement that I did not even know existed until I read this book. I did not realize that there was a name for the exodus of Black Americans who left the Jim Crow South and went elsewhere for better lives. So, highly recommend this. I have also picked up Wilkerson's other book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. I have not read it yet, but I do plan on reading it soon. Last, we have 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This was just a delightful little book. This book is a compilation of letters between Helene Hanff, who was an American journalist, and Frank Dole, who was an employee at Marks & Co., which a bookstore in London. The relationship starts in approximately 1948, I want to say, where Helene is looking for certain books that she's unable to find here in the United States, and she sees some sort of advertisement for this British bookstore, and so she writes to the bookstore asking if they have certain books, and the person that writes her back is Frank, and they have this lovely correspondence back and forth across the Atlantic for 20 years. They never actually do meet. She asks for books, he sends the books, she sends over money to pay him, and she also sends gifts to him and the staff at Marks & Co. because this is post-war London and they are still rationing at the time, so there are certain food items that they're unable to get. I believe she sends them a ham at one point, and they hadn't had ham or any type of substantial meat in many, many years. So it was just really, really touching to see these two develop a friendship. Helene is funny and irreverent, while Frank is very reserved. And although he can seem kind of stuffy, I think he's got something in there that's just waiting to burst out. She also writes to other members in the bookstore. She also develops a correspondence with Frank's wife. And it was just such a moment in time where people were so trusting. I mean, she would just write to Frank for a book and he would just send it without any money and trust that he would get paid. I mean, you can't do that nowadays. And it was just this whole friendship was done over letters, over books. And I just think that that is really, really touching. This edition also contains Helene Hanff's journal from I believe the 1970s, when she actually finally makes it over to London to meet the people that she corresponded with. It's called The Duchess of Bloomsbury, and this is just her journal chronicling her visit and everything that happens during the visit. And when she gets to meet Frank's family and other people in the bookstore, which at that time had since closed. And it was just such, a touching and funny nonfiction book. So I do recommend, if you can get your hands on a copy. Sometimes they can be pretty elusive. It took me a while to try to track down this book, but if you can manage to get your hands on it, I do recommend it. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great day. Bye.